Mr. Harrer.
Ah,
I have
fine.
your tickets.
I'm late. Take me to my train.
No, you don't understand.
What?
I am Peter Aufschneider. I am leading the expedition.
How accurate was the movie 7 Years in Tibet in depicting Heinrich Harrer's experiences in Tibet? Did the film accurately show his controversial Nazi ties? And how did Harrer himself react to the portrayal of his life and past on the big screen? Today, we'll separate fact from fiction and take a look at the real story behind 7 Years in Tibet. We'll analyze Harrer's perspective on the film, compare it to the historical record, and tell you everything that was made up by Hollywood just for drama. The real story may be even more fascinating than the version you saw on screen. If you remember, there was a scene in the movie where Harrer says, "Thank you, but I'm Austrian," to a Nazi official. So, did Harrer actually say that? Well, no. This detail was fabricated for the movie. There is no record of Harrer making such a bold statement, rejecting his association with the Nazi regime. In fact, his memoir from the 1950s makes no mention of regretting or rejecting his Nazi involvement. It wasn't until the 1990s, when his past was publicized, that he called his Nazi membership a stupid mistake and an ideological error. Was the movie historically accurate in showing Harrer abandoning his pregnant wife? Yes, this appears to be factual. The movie shows Harrer leaving for the Nanga Parbat expedition when his wife was pregnant, prompting her to divorce him while he was away.
Do you want to go home? Do you want to turn around?
Yes.
Would that make... It's the Himalayas! How long have I been talking about the Himalayas? How long?
Interestingly, the filmmakers invented this backstory before learning that it was actually true. Director Jean-Jacques Annaud admitted being surprised when they discovered Harrer had indeed abandoned his expectant wife, matching the fictional twist they had created. Did Harrer and his companion really encounter Tibetan bandits on the journey? Not exactly as shown in the dramatic cinematic encounter. In his memoir, Harrer describes a series of alarming but inconclusive meetings with people he calls Khampas, ethnic Tibetans from the eastern province of Kham. He writes about an undertone of fear and warning associated with the word Khampa, which was synonymous with robber at that time.
Yellowhead! No! Give me what? We have nothing! Give me money!
We have no money!
No! Give me what? We have nothing!
However, Harrer doesn't mention any particular incident where Khampa bandits tried to attack them, as the film depicts. The Khampas were a fiercely independent warrior people who did engage in banditry, as Harrer's memoir suggests. But the movie likely takes creative license in portraying a more cinematic, heightened moment of conflict. How accurate was the movie's depiction of Harrer's arrival in early days in Lhasa? For the most part, the film stays relatively true to Harrer's own account from this point onwards, apart from inventing a fictional romance storyline. We see Harrer deceiving officials to gain entrance to the forbidden city of Lhasa by waiving travel documents, which aligns with what Harrer described doing. His early experiences settling into the city and befriending locals also seem to accurately follow the memoir's narrative. However, the movie does embellish the intensity and depth of Harrer's relationship with the young Dalai Lama.
It is an honor to meet you, Your Holiness.
Yellowhead. Yellowhead.
While Harrer did tutor and befriend him to an extent, some of the more fanciful scenes, like building a movie theater for the Dalai Lama's entertainment, may be dramatized. How did the movie portray the Chinese invasion of Tibet? Was it accurate? No, the film's depiction of the Chinese invasion contains some glaring historical inaccuracies, likely for dramatic effect. Here are a few key examples. It shows shocking violence by Chinese troops against Tibetan civilians, directly contradicting reports that the Chinese army was relatively disciplined and tolerant in its approach initially. It invents a scene where rude Chinese generals trample a sacred sand mandala symbolizing peace, which did not actually occur. Sources agree the Chinese respected Tibetan religion and culture early on. A Chinese broadcast states the remote kingdom of Tibet is an integral part of the Chinese territory, but official stances acknowledge Tibet as a separate nation returning to the motherland. Most shockingly, the Tibetan military is shown hopelessly outmatched, fighting the PLA with primitive bows and arrows. In reality, Tibet had a somewhat modernized army with rifles and even made military gains against Chinese forces in prior decades. While the broad invasion did occur, the movie takes significant artistic license in depicting exaggerated cruelty and portraying Tibet as alarmingly backwards. Did Harrer actually compare the Chinese occupation to Nazi beliefs he once held? No. The movie fabricates this parallel between Harrer's former Nazi ideology and the totalitarian Chinese occupation of Tibet. There is no record of Harrer himself making such an explicit comparison in his memoir or other writings. The film has Harrer say in a voiceover, "I shudder to recall how once long ago I embraced the same beliefs. How at one time I was no different from these intolerant Chinese." This line was a late addition by the filmmakers after Harrer's Nazi past was publicly revealed during production. It seemingly aims to incorporate his transformation from extremist roots into the storyline's message. However, the real Harrer does not appear to have drawn parallels between his past Nazi affiliations and the harsh Chinese policies in Tibet. Was Harrer's son and their reconciliation portrayed accurately? Not entirely. While the movie does show Harrer having a strained relationship with his son Rolf, named Peter in real life, the reconciliation appears to be made up. In the film's final scene, Harrer returns to Austria, and they share a bonding moment climbing an Alp peak together, placing a Tibetan flag at the summit. This seemingly represents repairing their broken bonds. However, Harrer's real-life son Peter stated in interviews that they didn't have much of a relationship, contradicting the movie's heartwarming conclusion. Peter was raised by his grandmother and said he has no hard feelings, but also wasn't particularly close with his father later in life. How did the film approach showing Harrer's Nazi ties? Was it accurate? The film's handling of Harrer's Nazi ties is somewhat mixed in terms of factual accuracy. Initially, the screenplay made no mention of Harrer's affiliation with the Nazi Party and elite SS forces. This was an embarrassing omission, as those details were revealed in the media just as filming completed. In response, the filmmakers added 2 brief lines of dialogue to incorporate this undisclosed past. Early on, a journalist calls Harrer a distinguished member of the Nazi Party. The end voiceover has Harrer regretting having once embraced the same beliefs as the intolerant Chinese. However, these additions only hint at Harrer's Nazi connections without fully explaining them. The movie doesn't fully address or explore his active involvement in extremist Nazi groups before the war. Did any other inaccuracies in the film spark controversy? Yes, a few of these were. 1. The film condenses the timeline by having Harrer escape the British POW camp much earlier than he actually did in 1944. It also leaves out his initial escape attempt with an Italian officer before succeeding. 2. Harrer's memoir mentions nothing about liking a Tibetan woman or having a romance storyline, so this was invented for the film version of events. 3. The scene depicting Harrer escaping Dehradun by calming authorities with a photo of the Dalai Lama has no clear basis in his written accounts. 4. Harrer did not propose or devise any escape plan for the Dalai Lama himself, as the film portrays, though he did encourage the spiritual leader to flee. Historians and fact-checkers criticize the film for prioritizing a dramatic story over accuracy by adding made-up subplots and rearranging events. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We've talked about historians criticizing the film, but how did Harrer himself react to the film's portrayal of his life and past? Based on available information, Harrer himself appeared largely unaffected by most of the fictionalized aspects. In a July interview around the movie's release, Harrer acknowledged the film depicts him as an unlikable Nazi who was changed by Tibetan Buddhism. He didn't strongly object to how he was portrayed overall. This might be because the film still showed his eventual transition to Buddhist beliefs as genuine and meaningful. Some critics thought the movie didn't address Harrer's Nazi connections enough, or who he was before his spiritual change. But Harrer himself didn't say the movie misrepresented his life story in any big way. Did Harrer really introduce amenities like ice skating to Tibet? According to available records, this aspect of the film does have some degree of truth behind it. In his memoir, Harrer does recount reintroducing the sport of ice skating to Tibetans after finding a frozen lake, which they referred to as walking on knives out of cultural unfamiliarity. Was the rivalry between Harrer and Schneider for the affections of a Tibetan wife real? No. In Harrer's memoir, he makes no references to developing any love interests or entering a romantic entanglement during his 7 years residing in Tibet. Likewise, the real Peter Schneider, who stayed in Tibet a year longer than Harrer, never indicated becoming involved with a local Tibetan wife in any of his written accounts either. The addition of this love triangle seems to be one of the more obvious exaggerations in the movie. Where do you think Hollywood went too far? Would you consider this film historically accurate? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to check out our other videos from this exclusive debunking series. We'll see you there.
Well done, son. Well done.